Yes, everyone, welcome back to the Irish Hotspur. And in this video, we're going to be ranking the last 10 Spurs managers. And we've gotten a few categories here from the very, very best. That's only going to go to one of these 10. Technically, it's 11. I've decided to add in Ange Postecoglou and cheat a little bit. Curious where we even will, place him for such a short time at the club. We have great, which I think could just be, someone that we either were quite fond of or did a pretty good job for the most part. Of course, not many trophies amongst these managers. So a lot of it might be sentimental more than actual, real stats or anything to bring up. Unfairly sacked. I think that's something that we'll bring up, with one or two of these managers that, maybe got the boot from Daniel Levy sooner than they probably should have. Average, just maybe just step up below or step above, excuse me, awful. And I think you know what I mean by awful, just terrible. We wanted them out pretty much straight away, or they just really, failed to impress during their time at Spurs. So everybody, if you can for us, smash that like button, get into the comments below if you disagree with any of our selection at any point. And also any of you more experienced Spurs fans, do give us some education in the comments as well, in case you might have thought that some of our selections were not really, the best representation of their respective times at the club. But let's start with a certain Antonio Conte, Dave. Might as well just start spicy. Where does he lie in these?
Do you know what? It's a hard one, Jack, because he came in and he did deliver Champions League football despite
Yeah.
everyone not expecting him to. And when you look at the squad he done it with, you would say fair play to him because a lot of them are now gone for Ange, under this Ange Postecoglou revolution. And I felt sorry for Conte to a degree because he was sort of came in that period where we were after bringing in the data-led scouting model, and we were maybe pivoting and changing direction and starting to maybe make some signings based off that rather than what Antonio Conte actually wanted. And when you hire someone like Conte, you have to give him what he feels like he needs to make all this work and to help deliver the success that he does at other football clubs. And to be honest with you, the rant that he left Tottenham with, I know a lot of people didn't like it, but he said a lot of home truths, and I'll always thank him for that to a degree because he said stuff that maybe will wake some Tottenham fans up as well, which I absolutely loved him for. Um,
It's so
but things
hard.
things things were spiraling out of control the season he got sacked. So I would say on that, um, I'll go average.
Yeah, Dave, I'm gonna throw him in a similar category, but it's for a few different reasons. Just quickly on Antonio Conte, I was a huge fan of him before he even came to the club, as maybe
Mm,
people have starting to realize. I do enjoy attacking football, but I'm slightly more conservative than maybe the average Spurs fan. And at the time, Antonio Conte was a bit iconic, for people like myself growing up, trying to understand the game, trying to learn the game. And I, took a big fan to Antonio Conte's play style. Yes, it's not always that pleasing on the eye, but I thought he was very good at game management. I thought he was very good at inspiring players, kind of giving them that sort of dog attitude in the midfield or in the back line. I just liked a lot of his teams. They just felt like they were tough to come up against. They had that sort of nastiness about them. And I did even like his antics on the touchline. I'm always a big fan of, a manager that's bouncing up and down, running across to the assistant, to give them an earful, or, pointing at their assistant manager, screaming in their face, or, throwing players onto the pitch, out of anger,
mm,
that sort of thing. And I liked his passion. I liked his energy. I kind of even liked, the puzzle games that he would give the
yeah.
media all the time, all that sort of housery. I was just a big fan of the guy in general. Maybe some people probably feel the complete opposite. And that's where I was going to get on to next with Antonio Conte, because as much as I thought he could have been a great manager for Spurs, the way that things ended with him, a lot of it was his own doing. Yes,
Yeah.
I don't think he was given all the resources or the patience that maybe was necessary for him to be successful at Spurs. But at the end of the day, he kind of sacked himself, and he then
Yeah.
left, sort of the Spurs fan base and pretty much almost ruin. It's not like we were in any sort of financial ruin or anything like that, after his time here. We were kind of in almost like a emotional ruin after his time here. And a
Yeah.
lot of people have said that about Antonio Conte, that when he leaves, it's usually, kind of splitting the fan base type of departure. And when you do that as a manager, I think that does kind of drop you down a tier or two. You want to
Mm,
leave on a high. You want to leave with, like, the feeling that Spurs fans would want you back. And let's be honest, I don't think many Spurs fans, maybe would want
no.
Antonio Conte back at the club. So I think that then means, he's going to sadly go as an average manager. Definitely not awful, because, like you say, he got some very important wins during our time here. He did get us top four. he also, tried to get us, into another big top four race and eventually push on for trophies. And his record at the end of the day isn't that poor, actually, when you do
Mm,
look at over his time here at the club. And he had to deal with some people like Davinson Sanchez, Eric Dyer, and Ben Davies at the back line. So I'll always have sympathy for a manager that has to do that. But yeah, Dave, I agree with you. I think he does go on average for a
mm.
variety of reasons. And some of them may be unfair, but most of them I would say are kind of his own doing.
Yeah, no, 100%. Absolutely fair on that one. Where are we going next, Jacko?
Ooh, let's go to Harry Redknapp. Now, this is someone who kind of
Oh.
has an opposite kind of reputation with Spurs fans. We really seem to like him. We use him for the charity matches, with a lot of our players. He had a great relationship with certain players as well at the club. A lot of great players from Robbie Keane to Luka Modric to so many, Sandro as well. What do you make of maybe Harry Redknapp, Dave, and his time at the club?
Do you know what, Jack? One of my favorite ever managers at the club is Harry Redknapp. I absolutely love this guy. What a great character, but also, brought Tottenham to the Champions League for the first time ever
Yeah,
as well.
huge.
Absolutely unbelievable. And you hear any player that comes out that's played underneath him and his time at Tottenham, they all have great things to say about him. Absolute great things to say about him. And he brought Tottenham's to new heights. He brought some respect to the club. By dragging us up the table, getting us further in cups and stuff like that. So, absolutely love Harry Redknapp, and for me, I would put him down as great
Yeah.
at Tottenham Hotspur. I think in the end, he sort of sacked himself. He did, there was a lot of interest from England at the time, and I understand that he didn't really dispel the rumours. I think if England came calling, he would have fancied that job. And ultimately, the lack of dedication to Tottenham and the project and what they were building is ultimately what got him sacked. But
Yeah.
at Tottenham, one thing you can never argue when he was here, he got signings in through the door because of his connections with agents and everybody else. He could get deals done under Daniel Levy, and he deserves a lot of credit for that.
And for a lot of Spurs fans, he did kind of, to a degree, employ or did try to bring in the style of play that a lot of, older, more experienced Spurs fans would identify as the Tottenham way. And I
Mm.
think you can always give him credit for that as well. Maybe on to someone who also had.
Just quickly,
Yeah.
it's also keen to know that he was key behind Gareth Bale's surge in the career
Yeah.
he went to have, moving him from left back to left wing.
Yeah, and I remember him, for those two kind of particular moments with Luka Modric moving him into midfield, and then
Yeah.
bringing Gareth Bale, kind of the start of Gareth Bale's time at Spurs, and kind of bringing him through in that manner, like you said, onto someone who actually won a trophy at Spurs, Dave, and there he is lifting it for us, Juande Ramos. Now, this is actually a bit before my time. I
Mm.
kind of was a one would call maybe a bit of a glory hunter because I actually did, become a Spurs fan right after, we did win the League Cup. Boy, was I wrong. And I ended up, having to go through the long haul like plenty of you other Spurs fans,
Mm.
long suffering Spurs fans. But Juande Ramos did deliver a trophy, but I wouldn't say, if I remember correctly from a lot of other people's time with him, that he would go in the great category, unless I'm wrong. And maybe the trophy does mean that much.
Do you know what, Jack? I'll give you a bit of background to it, and then we'll let you know where you let us know where you think he should
Okay.
go. Look, for me, it comes with the famous saying that you know exactly where you were the day you lifted a trophy, and despite not having a lot of great memories under Juande Ramos's tenure, I know exactly where I was on the whole day as well of that day we bet Chelsea in the cup final, and of course should be fondly remembered for bringing that famous victory up, rising above, getting that header to go and win the football or go and win the cup, which was absolutely great. And I feel like, after that, and we had a really good squad at the time, Robbie Keane, Woodgate, players like that, some great players all the way through that squad. And it felt like we could have really kicked on from there. However, we ended up selling Robbie Keane and Berbatov that summer, and then we went into the new campaign. We were very short up front, and we ended up bottom of the league before he ended up getting sacked, and Harry Redknapp came in to took over. But where it really helped Harry Redknapp is we were able to get Robbie Keane back in the January, and he was able to bring in a couple of other strikers. But I felt like Juande Ramos was a bit hard done by, considering our two best players, two star strikers, were sold, and then going into that season, it had that knock-on effect, Jack.
Mm.
So I don't really know where to put him. I would put him probably unfairly sacked, because you see it. Anyone that says your two best strikers, the inevitable's coming.
I would put him on unfairly sacked or great by kind of the way that you put that, because at the end of the day, he did do the impossible job of delivering Spurs a trophy, and especially winning it over Chelsea, one of our biggest rivals. Also goes a very long way with me. So I'd probably put him in the unfairly sacked or in the great category. I think this is kind of maybe one for the comments, really, and they'll let us know, maybe where he belongs, kind of in these tiers.
And and I just want people to understand where I'm coming from by the unfairly sacked. Of course, where we were in the league position the following season, I think it was 8 games in, rooted bottom to the table. He deserved to be sacked. But when you sell Robbie Keane and Berbatov, we all know how great their partnership was and how fond we were of it. It's almost like they led him to that situation. So
Yeah.
that's where I go
Yeah.
unfairly sacked.
Yeah, it's hard for a manager to bounce back, or even
Yeah.
continue to perform in the same way they were under those conditions. Tim Sherwood, Dave, maybe another one that had some spiciness with the board and ended up having some back and forths between himself and Daniel Levy. Now talks about that constantly, and is one of those guys that seems to really hate the way that the modern game is going
Yeah.
for managers as well as for recruitment, that type of thing. Tim Sherwood. Now, I have a mixed kind of, memory of him. For some reason, it's a bit faded, but I also remember some good moments and I remember some less so good moments.
Look, for me, the most standout moment under Team Sherwood with Jack was his refusal to play Sadado over Harry Kane, where he
Yeah.
really stuck in. The club were ready to accept, I think it was only like 200,000 for Harry Kane at the time and let him go. And because Daniel Levy, it's well known, Daniel Levy walked into his office and said, "Why is Harry Kane on the team sheet tomorrow? We're selling him to Leicester for this amount." And he turned around, Tim Sherwood says, "Are you absolutely insane? This guy's potential is absolutely crazy. He's the best finisher at this football club. And whether you like it or not, I'm starting him tomorrow and I'm playing. I'm playing him tomorrow, regardless. And I think you're making a huge mistake." And then look, him digging down. Ultimately, Harry Kane went on to be the club's all-time record goal scorer, plus lead us to some very great heights, some very great moments, some very great nights. So for that reason alone, I'll be forever indebted to someone like Team Sherwood. But I think it's fair to say he goes as an average manager. There was a lot of highs, but there was also, like you said, a lot of lows in his tenure.
Yeah, I remember some good defeats or bad defeats, and I remember some very good wins. And I think his record, his overall kind of winning record, actually isn't too shabby. So it's not really worth putting him in the awful category.
Mm.
But his time was very short, if I can also remember correctly, at Spurs as well. So I am going to put him in the average category. I love that picture of him as well that we were able to get of him for this one. On to Dave, someone that again has a very, very soft spot with a lot of these Spurs fans. I think I know where he is going to land for maybe someone like you. He's got that great jumper on as well. Martin Yole, where does he land?
Do you know what, Martin Yole, Jack? I absolutely love this guy at Tottenham. Weirdly, he was actually brought in under Jacques Santini. I think he
Yeah.
was after off the back of winning the World Cup of the Euros with France, and Tottenham brought him in. But ultimately, what let him down is he couldn't speak a word of English, and Martin Young was actually the interpreter between Jacques Santini and the rest of the squad, which ultimately led to why the squad had a lot of liking for Martin Young, and ultimately what gave him the job in the first place, and he went on to do a really good job with Tottenham, Jack. He brought us into Europe, we were playing in UEFA Cup and stuff like that, and he also, a lot of the players he had to work with, a lot of them were relative unknowns that we were
Yeah.
bringing in from everywhere. And I think he done an absolute great job on at Tottenham Hotspur. And for me, was one of the ones that really sort of brought us further up the league, brought a lot more respect to Tottenham Hotspur, made a lot more teams maybe be more aware of the danger that we possess. And ultimately was the catalyst for this club to where it is today in terms of progression into the European realms and stuff like that. Obviously, we had it before, but we were in the doldrums for years. He brought that back to Tottenham Hotspur, and ultimately he was sacked at half time in the UEFA League game, which I thought was very, very unfair, because at the time there was a bit of a little bit of needle between himself and I think it was Frank Anderson, the sporting
Mhm.
director, where maybe they had two different ideas, because with Martin Yole, he basically didn't need a sporting director, because he had very good knowledge of players. He was instrumental in the likes of Moussa Dembele, Jan Vertonghen, Alderweireld, all them players, Christian Eriksen, who went on to become great Tottenham players at Ajax when they were first coming through. He was instrumental to them,
Mhm.
so he had a great idea of players and signings. He didn't need someone like Frank Arneson there. I think it was either him or Baldini, one of the two. He didn't need someone like that, and it ultimately became, a lot of needle, because one had one direction, the other one had one direction. They couldn't agree on anything, and ultimately Daniel Levy ended up taking the sporting director's side, and it cost Martin Yole his job. But for me, I'm going to put him down as a great manager at Tottenham
Yeah.
Hotspur, and I don't want anyone to tell me no.
Yeah, I've only heard from majority Spurs fans that he was a great manager. Obviously, he also is one of the famous ones, maybe infamous ones is the better word, for the unfairly sacked category as well.
Yeah.
But I think he's probably a hybrid of the two. And similar to Harry Redknapp, to a degree, what I've heard is that he delivered that Spurs or Tottenham way
Mm,
of playing, and that he was on the front foot, like you said, took maybe distinctly average players or kind of unknown players and made them play a very progressive brand of football, which is what kind of every Spurs fan to
mm,
a degree identifies with, because there are plenty of times where we haven't had good teams, but we still played that sort of on the front foot
mm.
style of play. And I think that's what I heard Martin Yule was kind of famous for.
And the thing is, look, we could put him in unfairly sacked because, of course, he was unfairly sacked. But I'd rather remember him for what he actually done for Tottenham rather than the story be how it came about him being getting sacked at halftime during the game, which was a very emotional day for Spurs fans. You know, everyone knew he was getting sacked at halftime. He knew, and then we still had another half to play. But I'd rather remember him as the great manager he was for Tottenham Hotspur.
Now on to another spicy one here, Dave. I think you know where I'm headed. Mr. Jose, the great one, the special one, similar to Antonio Conte for one. This is a guy that I grew up kind of watching. This is kind of during my era of, learning football, understanding the European game, getting used to kind of these managers. And Antonio Conte and Jose were easily next to Pep and Jurgen Klopp, some of the winning most managers that I'd
Yeah,
ever seen during my time growing up. I really wanted it to work out for him at Spurs. I remember actually out of all the announcements of certain managers, I remember at the time, I think I was in early college, maybe late high school. And I remember
yeah.
just bouncing out of my, sofa the moment that it happened. I felt actually to a degree, even though I do know that Tottenham Hotspur are a big club, it felt like a big club signing at the time where you were just like, dang, I didn't know Daniel Levy had it in
Mm,
him, to bring in a guy like this. That being said, his time here was a very mixed one. He did have some back and forths between himself and the board, had some back and forths between himself and the media. Certain players we know at the club also liked him, certain players didn't like him. He had that really good, run where we were at the top of the league for a large period. He took us to a cup final. And then there were some embarrassing defeats as well, from the Dinamo Zagreb knockout to some other ones as well that were just some bad defeats at his time here. And the style of play, in plenty of situations wasn't that pleasing on the eye when watching Jose Mourinho. So Dave, where does he land for you? This is a funny one.
Do you know what, Jack? I'd put him as unfairly sacked, to be brutally honest. And I'm going to give a number of reasons why. I think if people actually go back now and take the emotion out of it, which it will be because it's time of a previous gone by, and actually rewatch that Spurs documentary, which I have done, I think he gets a hard judgment by Spurs fans. At the end of the day, he was always going to have a tough job coming in here and rebuilding after Pochettino. We all knew that squad was coming to an end, that it needed to be shipped on and it needed to be rejuvenated. Now, Jose Mourinho bought his own players that he wanted to sign, the famous one, Kim Min Jae, for 5 million. Club said no and ended up bringing in Joe Rodon for 11 million. Well, it looks like Jose Mourinho in the long run was right on that. He also done his best to try and get every ounce he could out of Ndombele, and I'd argue the only manager to get anything out of
The Endon
Ndombele
Bello
at Tottenham
interpreter.
Hotspur. You
Yeah.
know, you seen this guy running around apartment blocks with the guy and everything else. He also had a difficult period in terms of the pandemic and everything else to manage the club through.
True.
He also brought in Dele Alli and tried to sit down, speak to him, and try and and stuff like that. So this guy done absolutely everything he could to get the best out of what was here at Tottenham Hotspur. But I argued at the time, Jose is not the problem. It's the weak mentality and lazy players that are. And since then, a lot of them are gone out of this
Yeah.
football club, and we're starting to see the benefits slowly on the pitch in terms of style of play and stuff like that. So for me, I actually think he gets a raw deal, and then of course sacked before a cup final because it was cheaper to sack him then than it was after the cup final. Which
Mhm.
again, only helps the thing that Daniel Levy doesn't want success. He just wants top four money and European qualification. He doesn't want the pressures of having to deliver success every single season. The sacking Jose Mourinho is probably the biggest indication of that. Because if there's anyone that's going to get you over the line in a cup final, especially against Man City, it's Jose Mourinho
Yeah.
and not bloody Ryan Mason. So for me, which is absolutely disgusting, by the way. The more I look back on it, the more
Yeah.
angry I
Such a
get.
weird time.
But Spurs fans also have to take a part in this one because they put so much pressure on the guy to get him out of this door. But I think when we ultimately look back, I think a lot of what he was trying to do was actually correct at Tottenham. And I encourage most people to go back and look at the documentary. And I think you realise he was right on a lot of what he was trying to do. And I think
Yeah.
ultimately the recruitment was piss poor for him. If you're going to bring in
Yeah.
Jose Mourinho for a rebuild, You know you got to bring in experienced players for this guy to work with, players that are ready for the here and now, that can take on messages and stuff like that. They brought him in Sessegnon, Roden, players like that, a lot of younger players, which is not Jose Mourinho's remit. So for me, I'm going unfairly sacked for all those reasons.
I believe firmly that he would have been able to win a trophy with Spurs. It might have been a League Cup, it could have been a Europa League or something, but it just didn't work out. And I think, for to a degree, I think Jose Mourinho was unfairly sacked. And I'd also had to argue as well, like compared to someone like an Antonio Conte, who I was a big fan of before he came to Spurs. I was huge fans of both of them. Jose to me didn't look like as much like Conte, where Conte, you could tell, didn't really want to be here. Like he just wanted to be here for the short run, see if he could win something with us. Whereas with Jose, I did get a more of a vibe that he was trying things. He was willing to work with sometimes difficult situations and not complain too much. And I can respect that actually about Jose. Whereas with Antonio Conte, I think for a lot of reasons, he just kind of showed that he just didn't really want to be here compared to Jose. Whereas I think for a period, Jose really did show that he was trying things
Yeah,
and that he was willing to work with our situation. So I'm going to do unfairly sacked as well. Nuno Espirito Santo,
awful.
he wanted Dave right next to Anne Postecoglou. He did win Premier League Manager of the Month award, but what a short time it was. I mean, was that some of the worst football you had ever seen at Spurs?
Yeah, the worst football I've ever seen, Jack, at Tottenham Hotspur. It was absolutely atrocious. When you have Son operating on the edge of your box and having to beat the whole 11 just to try and get up the other end. I mean, it was absolutely atrocious, awful.
Yeah, and he certainly did not make us proud. Glenn Hoddle, where does he fall in all of this? Now, this is one that, of course, I've heard amazing things about during his time as a player, but I feel like his time as a manager was a bit of a mixed bag, if I remember correctly. Like it wasn't really what it was meant to be, or
Mm,
just wasn't exactly, what Spurs fans might have wanted or expected, with
mm.
such a legend of the club.
Yeah, look, he came in after George Graham, and there was huge hype around it. Of course, being ex-England manager who also, done very well with the England team to a large degree, but also, the fact that he's an ex-Tottenham legend and how great he was for Tottenham as a player. There's a lot of excitement originally around this hire. Now, I believe what was it? His first game he came in, he was thrust straight into a semi-final of an FA Cup. Didn't really go our way, but I think we had two finishes in the league, 9th and 10th, and ultimately maybe didn't deliver what everyone was hoping to, and eventually it came to an end. But he did bring some great players to the club. I mean, he was the one that brought Robbie Keane to the club and stuff like that. And at the time, Robbie Keane had a huge reputation, not only for what he'd done at Wolves, but people forget he was over there at Inter Milan with the likes of Ronaldo and people like that, the old Ronaldo. It shows how good Robbie Keane was at the time. And he brought him in. He was fantastic for Glenn Hoddle. Ultimately, there was a lot of ups, but also a lot of downs, Jack. So for me, I find it harsh because he is a real club legend, but I think it's only fair he goes an average.
Average. Okay. Let us know, everyone, if, more experienced Spurs fans, does he actually go as far down as awful? I'm curious, because, yeah, his time here wasn't that long. And I don't really remember people talking that much about it, or at least glowingly of his time as a Spurs manager. Andre Villas-Boas. Now, this one is funny, Dave, because he did, bring us to the Europa League. I remember correctly. We did have, some finishes inside, I believe, the top 7, if I'm trying to cast my mind back to the Villas-Boas days. But I was telling you before, we were recording that what I remember most about the time during Villas-Boas was how much he was carried by Gareth Bale
Yeah.
and certain other players in that Spurs team. And I also, kind of similar to Nuno, remembering the style of play in the football being distinctly bad and distinctly awful, and just again being very reliant on certain big
Mm,
moments from big players like a Gareth Bale. And maybe that's what we could thank for Villas-Boas, is that he probably contributed to the Gareth Bale highlight reels, the compilation reels
mm.
that we see today, because he was making so much hard work out of things and making him have to do everything for us. I almost want to put Villas-Boas at awful, or I put him at average.
I put him as awful, Jack. I absolutely hated his tenure at Tottenham. I thought his football was shit. Like you said, he was carried by Gareth Bale. How many wonder goals did he score? I remember a couple against West Ham, cutting in, scoring a 30-yard screamer just before the end of the game and, stuff
Yeah.
like that. He was absolutely carried. And to be honest, I think a lot of the players at the time didn't really like him, didn't really like his methods and stuff like that. And I just felt like, it was a squad where it was like in games, it's like, right, go on, push on now, go for the game. You'll beat these. And he didn't ultimately. And for me, I think it was just an awful wasted experiment.
he didn't have Gareth Bale, I think he would have gotten sacked sooner. He just got bailed out, I remember, on so many occasions from huge goals from him. And like
Mm,
you said, just the style of play is just so awful. I just remember it just being very boring, actually, during some of those 4:30 a.m. games that I was waking up to watch Spurs during that
yeah.
period. Now, Ange Postecoglou, and then the one and only Maurizio Pochettino. And I think you may know where Maurizio might fall in all of this, despite, his move to Chelsea, or maybe Dave might surprise us. You never know. Ange Postecoglou, Dave, can we put him in any one of these categories? It's hard to say.
I don't think we could put him in any one of these categories, but what I would say, Jack, is I think we can maybe have a guess on where we think he's going to go after his
Yeah,
time at Tottenham
great idea.
Hotspur. So I'll let you lead the way on that one. I'm,
If Spurs stick to the plan, and if Spurs stick to their project, and they don't squirm, they don't weasel, themselves out of this like they have with some of these other managers, of the past, I could see Ange Postecoglou going down as a great, because the fact that
mm,
Harry Redknapp and Martin Jol find themselves in the great category, a part of that is due to sentimental kind of value. Like, we felt like they delivered a style of play that Spurs fans could identify with. They, to a degree, brought the fan base together where we are all kind of singing Kumbaya, and felt like we at least could be happy to watch our team play and what they were trying to do on the pitch. They also delivered an identity to the style of play as well, right? That's a big thing for Spurs fans, where even if you are losing games, at least there is a clear, distinct identity to what you're doing. That seems to be the biggest complaint about Ten Hag right now, is despite the
mm,
trophies won, they have no idea what the hell he's
yeah,
even trying to do on the pitch out
yeah,
there. And that seems to be a big value for football fans in general. And also for Ange, for me, he's gotten rid of, actually, this is my favorite thing about Ange, the outgoings during his
yeah.
time period. I know you've kind of said he's a bit of a beneficiary to the fact that they were kind of towards the end of their contracts, but still, I mean, in the 12 months or 12 plus months that he's been here, I've seen some of the guys that
Mm,
I've just been so annoyed with over such a long period, leave this club. And that's actually thanks to his style of
mm,
play. They just were never going to be able to swim under his way of playing. So I'm
mm.
gonna say he ends up finishing as a great, probably for more sentimental reasons than maybe for trophy reasons.
Fair. Look, and I think one thing where he does deserve respect is his refusal to play some of the shit players, unlike a Conte, unlike a Jose. So I think he does reserve respect in that regard. Look, I think he has potential to be great. I think this season could go one or two ways. We could either click, start, finish our chances, and go on a rip roaring run, or we can end up, a couple of games down the line looking for a new manager and stuff like that if results don't pick up. Um, I want to say great. I hope he ends up being a great Tottenham manager. I just have a feeling somewhere along the line he could be unfairly sacked. But
Mm,
we're going to stick him in great because, he brings a certain style of football, like a Martin Jol, like a Harry Redknapp, like the Pochettino that we're going to do. We're seeing a repeated theme here. We like our football being played one
yeah,
way and one way only. All the other managers all have a bit more defence, bar maybe Glenn Hoddle, all have a bit more the pragmatism about them,
yeah,
and Tottenham
exactly.
fans do not like that, and it doesn't go well at Tottenham. So it's
Yeah,
clear, scrap to dare is to do, fortune favours the brave. That's the new motto for Tottenham going forward. But when it comes down to the last guy, Pochettino, I think there's only one place for him, the best. This guy has brought me ultimately where I want to. When I was growing up as a Tottenham fan, yes, Martin Jol done a great job and Harry Redknapp done a great job, started to put respect on Tottenham's name. But we were still, especially me, all the big six fans around me, still bullied as that little club. People calling us the Spuds, everything else, But Pochettino was the only time in my life where I can stand up to United fan and say, "Shut your mouth, go and fix the leak in Old Trafford, you moron." I could stand up to an Arsenal fan and
yeah,
say, "Pipe down, go and sit in the library there for an hour or two."
yeah,
To all these other big clubs, I could just sit down and say, "Look, just shut up. You don't speak to me because we're going to batter you this weekend." And ultimately, he brought us to great heights, brought us close to a couple of Premier League titles, close to a couple of FA Cups, close to a couple of League Cups, and also close to the Champions League, of course, getting to that final. And for me, one of the best starting 11s I've ever seen at Tottenham
yeah,
Hotspur under this guy, where I feel like he wasn't helped was signing the players to for the bench or on the periphery of
yeah,
the squad to really help come in and make that impact. Largely, I think Pochettino deserves a lot of credit for actually making it work. He turned to the academy. He would pull up youngsters. He'd have no problem if he had
yeah,
to
yeah,
turn to them and throw them in. And I think this guy actually really worked hard to make it work for himself at Tottenham, but also for Daniel
Yeah.
Levy, who we know doesn't want to commit to huge funds. So I think, he's perfect for Daniel Levy, and you could see the
Yeah.
relationship they built. Sad he didn't come back to Tottenham. You're probably happy now that he didn't come back to Tottenham, Jack. You know that he's USA manager, and I think, by the way, if he's not tempted to get out of that USA contract, I think he's going to do a magnificent job there. You look at the USA team; there's a lot of youngsters around Europe right now with great potential.
Yeah.
He's going to develop them into become a real force. So for me, for what he's done at Tottenham Hotspur, I'll always be indebted to the guy, despite me not liking him being Chelsea manager at the time. But he was the best for me.
I think he basically also doubled, if not tripled, kind of the size of kind of Spurs fan base to a degree, like because he was just that successful, right? He made Spurs fans dream that were already Spurs fans, like myself. He kind of similar to Jose started to make me feel like we were a much bigger club than we actually were, and that was just because of the style of play that he was, employing on the pitch, but also because of just the sheer success, in terms of Spurs, I guess, at the end of the day, and that he helped us, feel like
Yeah,
we could, challenge for things, that we were as good as the rest, and that we could, stand up to the best of the best and give them, a good game and, give them a good contest. And he did also, similar to Harry Redknapp, to Martin Yule, to Ange Postecoglou, he did have a pleasing on the eyes style of play of football as
yeah,
well. And during those years where sadly I was never able to go, but I do, hear from a lot of Spurs fans that the White Hart Lane was bouncing during that
yeah.
time that he
It was
was a Spurs
fantastic.
manager. So there's kind of a lot of things that go into Pochettino's time, where I think just Spurs fans, came together. There wasn't really much split or fractions, in the fan base. Just everyone was kind of on the same page that this is the right guy for
Mm,
us, and he's, going to take us to special places. And he just wasn't really given, that kind of like with Jurgen Klopp, where kind of things started to fade, with that squad. He needed to get that rejuvenation, needed to be
mm,
given, more time to be able to kind of basically start over again. And we just didn't give him that chance, it looked
yeah.
like. But yes, results also play a huge, huge factor. And he's just someone that still to this day, I think, holds a very special place in a lot of Spurs fans' hearts. So I think
Mm.
he easily goes into that best category. But everyone, let us know in the comments below if we got any of these wrong. I think we might have gotten a lot of these right, if I'm going to be perfectly honest. I think a lot of people might agree with some of our selections here, but please let us know. Educate us on these selections here. Smash the like button as well. And thank you for supporting the channel, everybody. Come on, you Spurs. In the big Ange we trust. Let's hope he ends up in that great category, and we'll see you next time.
Fortune favors the brave.